Do you think you have what it takes to solve the hardest words and context questions on the digital SAT? I'm Nathan Greenberg from Ivy League Mentors, and I've been teaching the SAT since before a lot of y'all watching this were even born. And for this video, I've looked through dozens of past exams, along with the entire official question bank, and I've come up with 8 of the hardest words and context questions ever created. Now, if you're a beginner, I'm going to suggest that you pause this video right now and head on over to my other video where I go into a lot more depth about how to approach this type of question. But if you are already at the 600 or 700 level and you're trying to push that up a little bit more to like a 750 or an 800, and you're struggling with vocab questions on the SAT, well, then this is the video for you. So if you're up for a challenge, let's give it a go. Let's start by reading the text. In the 2010s, the price of vintage He-Man action figures rose dramatically, which had the counterintuitive effect of blanking demand. Buyers who hadn't previously wanted to purchase old action figures thronged the market, believing prices would continue to rise and the toys could be resold later at a profit.
Mr. Greenberg.
What is it, student me?
It's talking about prices going up, so the answer has gotta be monetized.
Oh, student me, really? You can't just pick out a random keyword and base your answer off that. You need to think about what the sentence is actually saying.
So let's break this down. The first half of the sentence is telling us about the effect of the price rising on the demand for these action figures. And it tells us that it is a counterintuitive effect. In other words, it's the opposite of what would be expected. Now, if you have even the most basic knowledge of economics, you probably know that if the price of something goes up, demand for that thing usually goes down. So a counterintuitive effect would be the demand going up. Therefore, we might guess that we're looking for a word similar to increasing or boosting. But even if you've never studied economics a day in your life, you could figure this out from the part that comes after the colon. Remember that a colon is always going to be followed by information that explains the thing before it. In this case, the part after the colon gives us more information about the effect of the price rise on the demand for these action figures. And it tells us that buyers who hadn't previously wanted to purchase them suddenly thronged the market. In other words, more and more people want to buy them. This reinforces our idea that this price increase is somehow boosting demand. Now it's time to take a look at the answer choices. Exploiting demand means utilizing it or taking advantage of it, which doesn't make a lot of sense and doesn't match our prediction. Appraising means evaluating, and that also doesn't fit with our prediction. Now, engendering is pretty close. To engender demand would mean to cause or stimulate it, which fits well with our prediction that we are in some way increasing or causing more demand. It seems like it could be the correct answer. Looking at D, monetizing, to monetize demand would be to make it about money. Now, monetizing might be attractive because the sentence is talking about money, but it's not like the demand was ever not about money. There was a price which was lower and that price went up, but it was always related to money in some way, so we can't say that we're monetizing demand either. This confirms that the answer was in fact C, engendering.
Now, I think that one of the reasons this last question was considered a 3 out of 3 in terms of difficulty is because of the vocab. Like, if it had said boosting, I suspect that most students would have gotten it right. But engendering? That's a word a lot of students simply aren't going to know. And the truth is that while there are strategies for working around unfamiliar vocab, if you don't know a lot of words, you're probably not going to do very well on this type of question. So if you're looking to improve your vocab, I'd like to share a list that I've made, Essential Vocab for the Digital SAT. And you can download it for free on my website. I'll leave a link in the comments. Now let's check out another question.
As usual, we'll start by reading the text. The tendency to group authors together into distinct literary movements often encourages literary scholars to blank subtleties in an author's style. Those studying the works of Langston Hughes, for instance, may inadvertently overlook nuances in his work by focusing only on the most obvious ways in which his style corresponds to the Harlem Renaissance. So again, let's break this down. The word that we have in the blank is a verb, and it tells us what the literary scholars are doing to subtleties in an author's style. Now the big clue is in the second sentence, for instance. This means that whatever it's giving us in the second sentence is an example of what those scholars are doing to subtleties in a particular author's style. And it tells us that they are inadvertently overlooking nuances in this particular author's work. Well, nuances mean something very similar to subtleties, and if they are overlooking nuances, they're probably also overlooking subtleties. To overlook something means to ignore it, or to not notice it, or to fail to pay attention to it. So we're going to be looking for a word similar to that in the answer choices. Answer A, denounce, means to criticize something, so we can effectively rule that out and move on to answer B, discount. Now this one is a pretty good match.
Mr. Greenberg, are you sure about that? Doesn't discount mean like a lower price or something?
Well, student me, you're not wrong. Like most words in English, the word discount has multiple meanings. And the one that you're most likely to know is the one that you gave, to lower the price of something. But discount also has another meaning. To discount something as a verb can mean to overlook it, or to not pay attention to it, or to dismiss it. And that's the meaning that's used here. The moral of the story is that if you want to do well on the SAT, you also probably want to know the common secondary or tertiary meanings instead of just the primary meanings of each word. Now let's tackle another question.
As usual, we'll begin by reading. In studying the use of external stimuli to reduce the itching sensation caused by an allergic histamine response, Louise Ward and colleagues found that while harmless applications of vibration or warming can provide a temporary distraction, such blank stimuli actually offer less relief than a stimulus that seems less benign, like a mild electric shock. So to break things down, the word that we have in the blank is an adjective, and it's modifying stimuli. And the big clue comes right before it. It says, such blank stimuli, which means that we're talking about the kind of stimuli that we mention right before this. And if you look right before this, it's talking about harmless applications of vibration or warming, in contrast to the ones it talks about later, those that seem less benign. Therefore, we are probably looking for a word similar to harmless. Answer A, deceptive, means something that isn't really what it looks like. So that doesn't seem to fit, we can cross it off. We move on to answer B. Innocuous means harmless, which means a perfect match, and it's probably going to be our answer. C means novel, new, which doesn't fit our prediction at all, and D means impractical, which means not very realistic or difficult to use in the real world. That's another answer that we can safely cross off, confirming that the answer was, in fact, B, innocuous.
So before we move on to the next question, I just want to point out that such clue is a really common one. Anytime you see it, remember that it points to something that has already been mentioned. And if you just follow it back and figure out what that thing is, that should be enough to get you to your answer. Now let's move on to the next question.
Rejecting the premise that the literary magazine Ebony and Topaz, 1927, should present a unified vision of Black American identity, editor Charles S. Johnson fostered his contributors' diverse perspectives by promoting their authorial autonomy. Johnson's self-effacement diverged from the editorial stances of W.E.B. Du Bois and Alain Locke, whose decisions for their publications were more blank. So to break this down, we can see that the word in the blank is an adjective, and it describes the decisions made by Du Bois and Locke, in contrast to those of Johnson's. Now, it tells us that Johnson was someone who fostered his contributors' diverse perspectives by promoting their authorial autonomy. In other words, rather than asserting his own view, he let his authors write what they wanted to write. And because it says that Johnson's self-effacement diverged from the editorial stances of these other editors, we know that they were doing something pretty different. Therefore, we could imagine that their decisions were more heavy-handed, that they were asserting themselves more or expressing their own views more strictly in their publications. Now that we've established that, we can move as usual to the answer choices. A, proficient means skilled, which doesn't fit our prediction at all. B, dogmatic means, well, kind of opinionated, which means it's a perfect fit for what we predicted, and it's probably going to be our correct answer. C, ambiguous means sort of unclear or two-sided, which definitely is not what we want. And D, unpretentious means not trying to be impressive or not trying to be important, which also doesn't match our prediction at all. Therefore, we've managed to confirm that the correct answer is indeed B, dogmatic.
Now we are just halfway through the video, but before we move on to the next question, I'd like to interrupt with a brief public service announcement. I've written a textbook, Digital SAT Reading and Writing, The Ultimate Guide. Now, I may be a tiny bit biased, but I'm pretty confident it's the best resource out there when it comes to helping you prepare for the reading and writing section of the new digital version of the SAT. It's got detailed guides on how to approach every single question type, along with drills to put those strategies into practice. It's also got chapters on important topics like vocab and grammar, and there are 4 realistic full-length practice modules at the end so that you can put everything together and assess your skills. I'll leave a link in the comments, along with a code that you can use to get 25% off your purchase. Now back to the video.
As usual, we'll start by reading. It is by no means blank to recognize the influence of Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch on Ali Banisadr's paintings. Indeed, Banisadr himself cites Bosch as an inspiration. However, some scholars have suggested that the ancient Mesopotamian poem Epic of Gilgamesh may have had a far greater impact on Banisadr's work. So the word in the blank is going to be an adjective, and it describes the author's attitude towards recognizing the influence of Bosch on Banisadr. Now, we have a semicolon, and then we have indeed, which means we're probably emphasizing the idea that came before, which makes this part of the sentence a valuable clue. In the part after the indeed, it tells us that Banisadr himself cites Bosch as an inspiration, which implies that Bosch did, indeed, influence Banisadr significantly, which implies that the author thinks we should recognize this influence, that it is necessary or valuable or good to recognize this influence. Now there is one more complication, which is this phrase by no means. By no means is a negative phrase, meaning that it's not whatever comes in the blank to recognize the influence. Because we know that the author thinks it is a good idea to recognize this influence, that we should recognize this influence, we're probably going to look for a word that means the opposite. It's by no means bad, or by no means not necessary. A, substantial means significant or important, which is actually the opposite of what we want. B, satisfying doesn't fit well either because, again, the author thinks that we should do it. He's not saying it's not satisfying, it's saying that it is good. We move on to C, unimportant. If it is by no means unimportant to recognize this influence, that means that it is important, and we know the author thinks it's important because, as he points out in the part after, Banisadr himself cites Bosch as an inspiration. C is probably going to be our answer, but just to confirm that D, appropriate, is actually the opposite of what we would want, because again, the author is saying that we should recognize this influence. It is appropriate, and because of that by no means, we'd actually want to say that it's by no means inappropriate. Therefore, we've managed to confirm that the answer was in fact C, unimportant.
Now before we move on to the next question, I just want to point out that this is a classic trick that they like to sneak into these harder words and context questions. It's what I call a double negative, where you have 2 negatives that cancel each other out. So in this case, not unimportant equals important. You're going to get a lot of questions like this on the SAT, so make sure to follow those negatives carefully. And remember that if you get 2 negatives together, it equals a positive. Now let's move on to another question.
Critics have asserted that fine art and fashion rarely blank in a world where artists create timeless works for exhibition and designers periodically produce new styles for the public to buy. Luisenyo Shoshone Bannock beadwork artist and designer Jamie Okuma challenges this view. Her work can be seen in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and purchased through her online boutique. So the sentence is talking us about the relationship between fine art and fashion. And the second part of the sentence tells us that in our world, artists do one kind of thing, creating timeless works for exhibition, and designers do something very different, periodically producing new styles for the public to buy. The second sentence also is a clue. It tells us that the work of this particular artist and designer challenges this view, that she is doing both of these things. She's producing work that's in museums and can also be purchased. So it seems like we're talking about a view that art and fashion rarely go together. Now that we've made that prediction, we can take a look at our answer choices. Answer A, prevail, means to succeed or keep going, and that doesn't really fit our prediction of going together, so we can cross it off. Answer B, succumb, means to fail to resist something, and that also doesn't match our prediction, so we can cross it off too. C, diverge, means to go apart or in opposite directions, And that is actually the opposite of what we want, because we're trying to say that art and fashion rarely go together, not rarely go apart. D, intersect, has got to be our answer, and it makes perfect sense. If they rarely intersect, it means they rarely come together, which is exactly what we wanted, confirming that the correct answer is, in fact, D, intersect.
Let's check out another question.
Some robots, such as Serena, developed in 2008, and Coman, developed in 2012, feature humanoid characteristics like bipedal locomotion, so that people will find it easier to interact with them. While these features can help to blank feelings of comfort in people, a robot that looks too human can fall into the uncanny valley, meaning that its appearance unintentionally unsettles those who encounter it. So the word in the blank is a verb, and it's going to tell us what these features are doing to the feelings of comfort in people. And one of the big clues that I'm noticing is this word while at the beginning of a sentence. While tells us that the two parts of this sentence are going to have sort of opposite meanings. We don't know the meaning of the first part because it's got a blank in it, but we do know the meaning of the second part. And the second half of the sentence is telling us that these humanoid features can unintentionally unsettle those who encounter it. Now, to unsettle people means it makes them feel uncomfortable. But remember that the first half of the sentence is going to be an opposing idea, so it's probably going to be making them feel more comfortable. Therefore, I would predict that the word that we want in the blank is going to be something like increase or create feelings of comfort in people. With that in mind, we can move on to the answer choices. A, constrict, would mean to limit feelings of comfort, which is kind of the opposite of what we want, so we can safely cross that off. B, repudiate, means to deny or refuse, but that's also not what we want because we're not denying or refusing these feelings of comfort. Again, we are creating them. C, mitigate, is one that may be a lot more tempting to pick. To mitigate something means to make it better, but it can only be used for something that's already bad. You can mitigate a problem, but you can't mitigate feelings of comfort because feelings of comfort are a good thing. Therefore, we can cross off this answer. Now, we know by now that the answer is probably going to be D, buttress, but let's take a look at it. To buttress something means to strengthen it, and as we predicted, these features are probably increasing or strengthening feelings of comfort. Therefore, we've managed to confirm that the correct answer is, in fact, D, buttress.
Now, if you've been counting, you've probably figured out that this next one is the last question, and I've saved an especially hard one for last. You ready for a challenge? Let's jump into it.
As usual, we'll begin by reading the text and looking for clues. While recent scholarship has undermined claims that the works of 12th century Islamic philosopher Ibn Rushd were blank other Muslim philosophers of his time, it is indisputable that his location in the Muslim-ruled area of what is now Spain meant that his works were primarily available thousands of miles west of the era's center of Islamic thought. Now, this text is a little bit intimidating because it's one very long sentence, but let's try to break things down. One of the things that I'm noticing is, again, at the beginning, we have this word while, and that tells us that the two parts of this sentence are going to have opposing meanings. Now, we don't know the first part of the sentence because it has a blank in it, but we do know the second part, and we can use that to then figure out the first part. So let's look at the second part. The second part of the sentence tells us about the location of this person, Ibn Rushd, and it's telling us that because of his location, which was kind of far away, his works were primarily available, well, sort of far away, not near the era's center of Islamic thoughts. Now, the word that we wanted to blank tells us about his works and other Muslim philosophers at the time. And if his works were primarily available thousands of miles away from the center, we might predict that his works were not very important to other Muslim philosophers, or that they were not well known by other Muslim philosophers. Remember, though, that because of the while, we're trying to get our first half of the sentence to say that his works were important or were known by other Muslim philosophers. However, there is one additional challenge: the word undermined. To undermine a claim means to disprove it or to go against it. So if we're trying to say that his works were important, we are undermining the claim that they were not important. Therefore, the word that we're actually looking for is a word like not important to or not known by other Muslim philosophers of his time. Now that we've managed to break that apart and figure out what kind of a meaning we want, it's not going to be so bad. Let's take a look at our answer choices. A, controversial among, would suggest that his works generated a lot of debate, which goes against the idea of them being unimportant or unknown. B, antagonistic towards, means that they were sort of negative or against other Muslim philosophers. But again, that doesn't fit our prediction of them being unknown or unimportant, so we can cross it off. C, imitated by. Well, if other Muslim scholars are imitating his works, it would suggest that they knew about it and that they cared about it, which again is the opposite of what we want because of all those negatives. We can cross that off and move on to D, and by process of elimination, again, I know that D is probably going to be the answer, but we can also confirm this. If his views were inconsequential to other Muslim philosophers, it would mean that they didn't really care about them. And the idea that we're undermining the claims that they're unconsequential would mean that they did care about them, which would fit with this contrast established by the while. While we've disproven the idea that they're inconsequential or not important, they were still pretty far away from the center. We've managed to confirm that our answer was, in fact, D, inconsequential to.
So there you have it. 8 of the hardest words in context questions to ever appear on the new digital version of the SAT. How many did you get right? Tell me about it in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks as always for watching, and good luck on the test.